Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back. Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of, and I say this all the time, but I think we need to call Guinness Book of World Records the best podcast in all of human history, Armchair ESG with Nate and Yates. With me today, back from his travels, my partner in crime, Mr. Nate Geraro. Nate, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing well. It is the
Yeah.
holiday season. Spirits are up. I like the crisp weather. I'm feeling good.
Yep. Yep.
And
Very
then,
folly here in Dallas as well. So yeah. Yeah.
which is like winter for you.
As
Yeah.
fall as you could get in Dallas. So yeah. Anyway.
And then another familiar face joining us, Tessa Shaw, our marketing and content manager. Happy to have you on. Hoping to get you on more. How are you doing today, Tessa?
I'm doing just dandy. It's Friday over here in San Diego. So, well, as the rest of the world,
Yeah.
but it's sunny over here. Well, not yet, but I'm in San Diego, so I'm fine.
And so then joining us today, our guest, someone we're excited about, dual threat, like something we don't get on our podcast often. Author of the book Don't Feed the Clown: Sustainable Investing for Everyday Life, and founder, owner, CEO, and sole proprietor, I guess, of SustainVest, Dale Wannen. Dale,
Yeah.
thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm great. That was very nice. Very classy introduction. Yeah, I'm good. I actually just got done yoga about 20 minutes ago, so I'm very relaxed and sort of
There you go. There you go.
the caffeine's about to kick in though any minute now. So look out.
It would have been funny if you said you just finished a bourbon and you're feeling relaxed. Make for an interesting podcast.
Yoga.
Um,
Yeah.
or bourbon, or both. Maybe
Mm.
they need bourbon yoga, although yeah, that
Not a
could
bad
get
idea.
sloppy.
That could.
So, Dale, you are founder and owner of SustainVest, a sustainably focused investment firm, basically. And then you wrote a book about ESG being part of mainstream investing called Don't Feed the Clowns.
Mhm.
And for everyone listening, we got lots to talk about in this, but just to set the stage up front, who are the clowns?
Mm. All of us are clowns, aren't we, in some way or another? I mean, look at this podcast. No, I'm kidding.
That's a fair
That's a
point.
good, it's a good question. And I talk a lot, as you'll see over the next few minutes, but I'll try to limit it down. So the clowns, that actually wasn't my idea originally. I'm a pretty nice guy, tend not to point the finger. But my book coach constantly saw that I was mentioning the clowns in my industry, in this industry. So she sort of brought that up. So I wish she was on because she should take the blame for calling people clowns. But the clowns, I've been in this industry long enough to see the various ways of investment management and how it's done. And so the clowns are in my personal and professional journey are the characters that I was like, if I'm going to be in this business, I don't want to do it that way, or I don't want to be like that. So those are the clowns. I don't want to get too specific, but if further along you could ask me, but those are the
Okay,
clowns.
that's a fair point.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to think of where to start with this, and the beginning is usually a good place to start. What got you into this? You have a passage in your book where you talk about actually reading um, the charts in the newspapers while your mom sat next to you smoking when you were very young. So, how true is that? And then, legitimately, like, how did that lead to this profession?
Yeah, I question every day what I'm doing in this profession, but you're like, we don't need to hear that, Tim. I really thought I was going to be a bartender somewhere like in the Caribbean, sort of a Tom Cruise-esque type thing, but that didn't work out. So it is true. When I was a young kid and, you know, barely 10 years old, under that, but we would get the Atlantic City Press, which is a big South Jersey. It ain't the New York Times, but it's what you get when you're down in Southern New Jersey. And every Sunday they had a long, stock report, and every single stock for the young whippersnappers in the newspaper, you would literally see every single publicly traded stock available in the newspaper. It was just the symbol like MCD, Compact, I think was C. Don't quote me on that. CMQ or CMD. Anyhow, And I was so intrigued by just those numbers. I haven't been diagnosed with autism or anything like that. Maybe OCD is it more in my cards, but the point being is I would literally write down on a piece of paper just the number of what McDonald's stock was every week. And I would just every week write down, oh, $12, oh, 14. And so I just found it really interesting. And yes, my mother, this is back in the 80s. Everybody smoked Pall Malls and Benson Hedges and whatever at the kitchen table. So I have a vivid memory of the smoke billowing at the kitchen table as I sat there and read the stock pages. Nobody really paid attention to what I was doing.
That's actually a little romantic. I mean, I'm not encouraging people to go smoke now, but there was a romance to it then. I know what you're saying.
Yeah, sure.
So you're reading the McDonald's stocks in the newspapers in this classic Quentin Tarantino-esque, if you will, beginning of a story, but it led to a real career. And you talk in the book early on about cutting your teeth in a very Wolf of Wall Street, if you will, without the fraud, I guess.
Yeah.
Opening type of industry. So
Yeah.
for the people listening who you want to encourage to buy and read the book, can you give a little more detail on that? How the cold calls and stuff turned you into what you became?
Yeah, and thanks, Rob. It sounds like you actually read the book, so I really appreciate that.
You got a 5-star review too. Goodreads and Amazon.
Oh, great. Yeah, and I love the Wolf on Wall Street sort of synergistic thing, but completely different. This is more of the insurance salesman type Wolf of Wall Street, and I was barely 21. Got out of college, small school right outside of Philly, and just was looking for a job. I thought I was going to be this fancy suit and tie broker in Wall Street, and the path led me to a very big insurance company, and that's where it started. And it was not selling stocks or bonds or anything at this moment. It was selling long-term care and life insurance. The reason I joined it because I needed a paycheck. We had rent. Me and my buddy were renting an apartment outside of Philly and spending way too much money on beer. And I was like, well, this insurance company actually pays a salary for 3 months and then they leave you go, see you later. Very smart technique on their part because they get young whippersnappers like me to work very hard. And so I was making 100 to 125 cold calls a day, black and white. Again, I love to educate when I do seminars to young like college students and things. They always ask, how'd you get into the business? And I love talking about this because it's unheard of now. But you would just get black and white, 1-inch, 2-inch thick stack of paper with names, addresses, and phone numbers. They were local. You didn't know who they were. That was it. No other information. There was no database. It was just black and white photo of their address. And you just called. And out of 120 calls, you may get 2 or 3 appointments. And out of those 2 or 3 appointments that you went to sweet old Mrs. Smith's house, you might get one person who buys a $5,000 insurance policy. This is long-winded, but it was probably the hardest job I ever had until now, ever, was making all those cold calls and being hung up on so many times. But, and that's how I got into it. And then, of course, from there, I sort of developed into the banker. Then I went to work for a few broker houses, and not to get ahead. But each time I was in those positions, something was eating at me that I was not comfortable with. I wanted something more, just more soulful in this position, and none of them were doing that until we get to the end of the book, where so.
There's even an element, like you said, you wanted something more and you didn't know what. Like Tessa and I talk a lot about. So I'm the only one who I went from bartending into governance and ESG. Everyone else on here has a different background, and Tessa was, and everyone listening, I check out her articles on fast fashion, the music industry, wonderful write-ups. But she's coming back to me. She's like, did you know all this was going on? Like, there's this crazy world out there of people just throwing stuff away and you're looking for something. I like how you put it, but you don't know exactly what. But what was interesting about your career path is, like, if I just wrote it down on paper in a very technical format, like insurance salesman, banker, investment manager, you're not thinking like punk rock journey to sustain vest. The contrast once you read the book, is pronounced, to say the least. How much of that, like, of your personality, yourself, drove you to go out on your own and start a sustainable investment firm?
Wow. I mean, that's a great question. I didn't even think that happened to me, that there was this major shift. I do have to thank, there's certain people that enter your life along these paths. And I don't want to get too weird here. I do want to talk about ESG and stuff, but
Yeah, no,
and I,
it's fine. We can talk about the book. We'll get there. It's wide open. So
yeah. Well, you run into a few people along the way that almost inspire you. And if they know what they're talking about, you sort of listen to them. And so I had a few people, one of which is a gentleman by the name of John Harrington. And we don't need to list John's bio here or anything, but he was sort of an Obi-Wan Kenobi to me. I was a lost Luke Skywalker at one point. And I met him. I honestly, I
so
don't
that's a
even know
Star
where.
Wars reference for the record.
Yes, yes.
Sorry.
And I just met him randomly. I was always out shaking hands, before social media and things, you went out and shook hands and chatted. And I just happened to be, it was luck. I met him and he's like, I'm actually looking for somebody. I was at that point registered, through the banking industries and the various positions I had. And wow, like what an opportunity. It just goes to show you that going outside and meeting people, it's really important because things like this can happen. And I work for John, and learning from Obi-Wan, I learned the Force in a lot of ways by him. And he had his Yodas as well that I was able to be in touch with because of who John was. And so that was a big turning point because he showed me like, this is the way, right? Oh, that was a Mandalorian reference there too. So we're going big on Star Wars. This is the way. So
There you go.
yeah. So that was it.
Yeah. No, continue. Sorry.
I was, and he was the final moment where I knew that's where I want to go, right? And I worked for John for 6 or 7 years as a portfolio manager, but the previous 20 years in the various positions, I knew that I had to go somewhere else. Like I knew this wasn't what I was gonna do. Even to this day, I don't think any of us, I still picture myself in the Caribbean as that bartender. So even though I'm working hard right now and my business is doing well and my clients are great, and I think we're always reaching for something. But right now, in the ESG world, I feel like this is a good place to be.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Dale, I think that's kind of my story as well, right? You leave college, you have to get a job to pay the bills, right? I had other family obligations, and so you're grinding and you're like, man, I got to do this for the next 40 years. And not that it wasn't unimportant, but it was very uninspiring. And I remember coming back from a trip overseas and thinking, I got to do something. I can't do this. And those people that come along your way that help you, say, hey, there's this whole world of, in my case, I went to like anti-money laundering and anti-corruption at World Check and doing that. And I remember one of my bosses, hey, we're shining light into dark corners of the world. I'm like, wow, that's exactly what I want to do and make money and take care of my family. And so I love the book, because it is that journey of inspiration. And I really think what it will do for people that read it is show you that impact investing or ESG investing does not negate actually making returns while you make the world a better place. It's just a thoughtful process of how you make those returns and how it impacts people. I love the titles of your subtitles of your chapters. I don't know who put those together, and I don't know where we're going to go with that. But I have some of them, the marijuana of investing, the OGs of the impact investing. ESG haters get a hate. I love those. I just went through and I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to read about this. And so I thought you did a great job there. So Rob, I don't know where you want to take this, but I do have some some questions that I'd like to pick
Yeah,
his
well,
brain.
so because I do want to jump into the ESG part because there's a fulfillment and the soul aspect there, but you've actually touched on something very fundamental. Because for me, it was bartending, it was serving and bartending. When you cut your teeth on something working hard, you learn like the value of hard work. I mean, it's rewarding. I don't know if you've all read Anna Karenina, but I always think of the grass cutting chapter when Jovin's doing the following all the grass cutters and he's just got a scythe. And at first it's all hard, but then he starts to sort of get in the flow and he's feeling better. And it's like, there's something to building character, but then being able to take it and apply it to doing good while doing well is an awesome opportunity. And that's going to be my next question, but I had one pre-question for that, because something you talk a lot about in the book, you warn people of some of the potential traps of contemporary investing, but there's a lot of them that if you were to Google it, it would say this is a bad thing. And your argument for most of it isn't that it's a bad thing. It's an understand what you're getting. It's you want to pay a toll for a New Jersey road. Okay, but you get a smooth road. I have an active investor. I don't have time, and I do play around with stocks a little bit too, but I very much like my advisor. And she is very sympathetic to all of my values and make sure that we're not invested anywhere we don't want to be. You want to be in a passive fund too? Cool. That's up to you. And so the pre-question is, what are some of the things that really turned you off to the industry to make you go into what you're doing?
Yeah. Wow. That was very well said, Rob, because I'm glad that you caught that from the book. Like, here, I'm just here to educate. I don't think a lot of people understand what they're even doing. Investors, I see it every week. Somebody comes to me and says, "I didn't know that." I'm like, and I don't tell them you should have known that, but I really want to yell at them and be like, if you're going to have your 500 grand somewhere, you should have known that. I'll maybe mute the phone when I say that and be like, well, that's okay. So I think, again, it's just my journey and what I've seen that I'm able to put this in a book, and hopefully I've made it like simplified where people aren't like overwhelmed with jargon of the finance world. The insurance industry was an eye-opener for me right away because I saw what I was making as a young kid selling $100,000 annuities to people who had $150,000 to their name, right? The insurance companies, and this goes to like fiduciary duty, which I'm sure a lot of people on the chat today know what this is, but back then, or certain parts of my business do not have something called a fiduciary duty, which means I can sell you a $100,000 annuity and make 6% commission. Thank you for the $6,000 check I just got. I don't do this now, by the way. I want to disclaim this. I no longer hold my life and health license. But people don't realize that that's probably not the right thing to do. Even if that fixed annuity is paying you 6% each year or 5% or whatever it is, it's just, those are the things that I saw in the industry that really irked me, even though I got a few paychecks and I was like, this is great. That's bar money there. But then as I went to banking, those things called proprietary funds, they still irk me. And this is something that's not illegal, but the big houses, perhaps the clowns, are selling their own funds,
Yeah.
even while they manage your money. I often point to this again. I like to refer things to more simplistic parts
if
of
I
life.
could interject real quick, there's not necessarily something wrong with that, but they don't tell you that's what they're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly it. Like, go to a Whole Foods, which I love Whole Foods, and I won't get into that, even though they're owned by Amazon. It's very well presented, and half the stuff in there is very good for you. But if Whole Foods was 100% Whole Foods brand, and I went in there, I don't know if I would be as interested, simply because of the fact that I like a little bit of variety. I don't want to buy a Whole Foods brand. So be careful when you look at a Morgan Stanley or a Bank of America, Merrill Lynch statement. And if they hold all funds of their own, which is called proprietary funds, that kind of bothered me or still bothers me. And then there's other things like non-liquid items. Like, I get various like new accounts from outside brokers. And
which, to be fair, when you talk about the fiduciary rule, it is impossible to sell a non-liquid fund and claim to be taking someone's fiduciary best interest.
That's a great point.
It's incompatible.
It's a great point. I still scratch my head after it happens when somebody brings on and again, I get, Raymond James, Ameriprise. I get these accounts that come in, and then I use Schwab as my custodian. Not that I'm pumping them up. I just have to have a third-party custodian as an independent advisor. And they're like, oh, we can't trade that. We'll bring it on, but we can't sell it. I'm like, well, what do you mean? What's the client supposed to do? Like, well, I think they have 5 or 6 years. They can keep contacting the entity that it's with, but it's non-liquid. And I'm like, you could have got that through a publicly traded REIT or whatever it is. And so things like that. And I tried to disclaim that in the book a little bit, like just be careful. They're not illegal, but just be careful that there's certain things out there that, and maybe this is selfish of me, but I bring it up only because I'm in the industry and I want to be, you know, I want to be liked. We all want to be liked. And so being put into this industry thing, I always try to let people know that I'm in the industry, but I'm just trying to do it a way that's the least clownish that can be.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a very good segue into the ESG part, because the case you make, it's nuanced, and I appreciate it, because you're not saying that ESG investing pays. You're saying ESG investing can pay, and there's a big difference. Because so first of all investment comes with risk. And second of all, like you said, I forget, it was like if you have a $20 million trust fund and you want to put it all into something sustainable and lose it, that's your choice, but that can happen. But then there is also this middle ground where you can say, I want to take my money and I want to make money with it, but I want to do it with companies that align with my values.
Yeah.
So I guess the first part of that, coming out of it, what are the biggest pitfalls you see for people trying to invest in a more responsible way?
Yeah. So the first pitfall, I'd say the first thing, that the hurdle to get over, is the fact that it's not a big deal. Like I always refer to as baby steps. So that's what I run into, is people are holding on to their Vanguard account like bear tight, and they can't let go of it because they're worried about, oh, this whole hippy dippy sustainable investing thing, it's not going to be the same. And that's not true at all. It's the baby step. And I think Nate mentioned, or somebody mentioned, the gateway drug to sustainable investing. I'm sorry, I have the table of contents up here because I haven't read it in many months, and I was like, oh, I forgot how funny that chapter
it was Nate. He's a huge pothead. He's all the
please.
Well, the gateway drug to sustainable investing, I mean, in California, it's a legal substance in California, marijuana. But the point is, you just have to make that the hurdle, or the pitfall that most people do, is not do it at all, because they're like, I like Vanguard. I don't care if it's invested in assault weapons. I've just known them for a long time. Bogle's a respected person. I'm going in that direction, and that's totally fine. But I got things to do. Me personally, I got things to do. I can't talk to you. You know, and I'm not going to say somebody's wasting my time, but that's fine if you're going to go in that direction. But life is short, and yeah, take that first baby step. The first baby step is to look at a fund like DSI, and I'm not promoting them. They're an iShares ETF that sort of weeds out 100 of the worst ESG performers. You know, they just do it, and you trust them. Are they perfect? No. I bet you DSI holds Pepsi. I bet you it holds, I don't know, a few oil companies. But at least some of those companies are doing a better job of being transparent when it comes to ESG than some of their competitors. So the gateway drug is sort of, DSI is a gateway drug to take a step into that. And Rob, I don't even know if that answered your question, but that's one pitfall, if you want to call it, which is not taking that first step.
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, I have a couple follow-up questions, but that segues into a bit of this DSI that filters out some of the worst. You have a chapter that says ESG haters going to hate, and you talk about greenwashing in there, right? So I think we have a sophisticated audience, but if you could explain what greenwashing is, and
Nate,
also that
we don't know sophisticated. Come on.
And what it is and why it's not just in the ESG industry, right? It's in other industries where you see greenwashing. So give our listeners just a bit of, because you were saying, hey, they weed out some of the worst ESG performers. Well, Are they greenwashing, or what are they doing? That type of.
Yeah. So maybe there's two items to this question, Nate, which is one is greenwashing in general, and then the second one is greenwashing when it comes to ESG, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So the first one is easy, like greenwashing. I don't know. I think in the book, you're jogging my memory here. My medicinally marijuana. I'm kidding. Um, I said
This
it was legal.
podcast is
It's
taking a
legal.
turn.
So like Volkswagen,
Yep.
it just I forgot I even wrote about this, but clearly that was a greenwashing episode where they're like, "Oh, our cars are like phenomenal," but one of the biggest
Yeah,
lawsuits of all.
as long as you adjust the meter.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Yeah,
Uh,
they were literally. I mean, what they did, and they went to prison for it. I mean, that's what's crazy. You don't see here big executives going to prison for greenwashing, but to the extent of what they did was, yeah, the worst type of greenwashing, which is just blatantly lying. And so you see that in regular businesses, right? Yeah. But then moving on to ESG, this is an even grayer area because now you have funds, mutual funds and ETFs who are promoting themselves as being ESG screened, but when you dig into it, they're really not. Um, in fact, a few of the examples in the book, and again, we're trying to promote book sales here. By the way, you don't make money when you write a book, unless Oprah Winfrey promotes your book, or maybe Leonardo DiCaprio if you're
Yeah, you
listening.
get a movie deal.
Yeah, I
There you
appreciate
go.
that. Just send this out to your contacts, guys. I really appreciate that. But the point is, here's where you have to be really careful when you're investing because certain firms have already been, slapped on the back of the wrist or told to close the fund because you can't just market as ESG and have no methodology as to how you're screening out these companies. And clearly for this chatter, for the podcast, your audience knows this, but it makes my job a little bit more difficult now because a lot of funds are popping up and I have to dive in. It doesn't take me a long time, but you just want to dive in a little bit more. Uh, your firms out there like Parnassus and Ariel that have been around, you can trust them. And especially when 100% of their business is focused on sustainable investing. But now you have the Goldman Sachs's and the Fidelities, they're coming and they're coming in with ESG. And so it's difficult and it's a work in progress as we speak. I do hope that my kids, this won't even be an issue.
Yep.
Everything will be ESG screened. And not only will everything be ESG screened, you won't have to question what MSCI, what the third party, what Sustainalytics. You don't have to question their methodology because it's going to be so well documented and so transparent that I don't think sustainable investing will be around. I'd like to hang my shingle for my business for sale today.
Investing will just be sustainable.
Yeah, it'll be part of it. If you look at a PE ratio of a stock, you're going to look at the ESG score of a fund or a stock. It's just going to be natural. Right now, it's still kind of unique. And don't tell any of my competitors this. SRI is not as popular as a lot of people think it is because every week I run into somebody who's asking me about this because they've never heard of it. But I think in 10 or 20 years, you young whippersnappers out there, you may have to hang a different shingle because ESG or sustainable investing will be just like EVs will be. That's a car. Like it's
not just direct investing, but because of consumer driven. So Tessa, I have a question for you. Now that you've been here, as you choose products, how much has working here and learning about this world like changed your perspective on what you buy?
Oh my gosh, so much. No, I'm not even joking. Like, of course, I definitely cared. I've always been proactive for, sustaining the environment, of course, doing typical like recycling and stuff, doing trash cleanups here and there. But I think what a lot of people don't realize, and this is just kind of in general, is like once you get immersed in an industry, whether it's medical, whether it's fashion, whether it's ESG, tech, sales, whatever, you get a better understanding for it. And it's almost like you get a better, not better, but more respect for that. So an example for myself is customer service. I worked in the customer service industry for about 7 years. And so it's, when you're on the other side of it, I mean, you've probably seen, you've been waiting in line at, JC Penney's or whatever, and you see a disgruntled person and, they're chopping the poor cashiers, their head off. And it's like over something so minuscule, but it's like when you're that person behind the desk, you just have, so much more respect for that, that person in their job. And, but no, going back to, your question, Rob, I literally check before I recycle. I literally check it now to see if it's recyclable because a lot of stuff, what people don't know is it's not recyclable. But yeah, I mean, I think out of one of the, I think California, where I am from, I think they do a pretty good job of it, protecting the environment and such. But I found myself even more, on LinkedIn, just following more environmental sustainability accounts and just like if any books, for example, reading and making sure,
Like,
those
don't feed the
books,
clowns.
huh?
Like, don't feed the clowns, which everyone listening,
Right.
you should buy.
Yeah, yes, of course, yes. And it's just like it's opened my mind to kind of the new, not possibilities, but new conversations, I think is the appropriate word. And I find myself now sparking these conversations more so with other people. And I think a lot of it too has to do with the articles that I write and pinging Rob and being like, oh, hey, did you know this? Because, something, a topic that might not have been talking about a lot sparks that much more generation and that much more conversation to lead to even bigger conversations. And yeah, that was a long-winded answer of saying yes, working here has definitely opened my mind.
Well, so I like how you frame that conversations, because this is something, Dale, you talk about a lot, is you don't have to sacrifice value for values. Um, but there's one thing I actually disagreed with you in the book, and I don't want to debate. I'm curious for you to elaborate on it, because you make that case, but then you're actually fairly sympathetic to rating agencies.
Mm.
And I find them to, I mean, they're not terrible, but there's so much subjectivity. And to me, it's like, so, so anyone who owns stock who doesn't pay attention to it, I'm telling you right now, you hold fossil fuels. Like, you do, I promise. If you're just in a fund, you have a 401k there, and you're in fossil fuels. It's sort of, I feel the same with ratings agencies. If you're just going by the rating, you're accepting, and you do point out some of the discrepancies between ratings. I mean, you're not saying this is the answer, but I'm curious, like, what gives
Mm.
you reason to hope with ratings agencies, I guess.
Yeah, this is a question I can't answer. No, because it's the most difficult question in this industry right now, right? And yeah, so let me think about this. No, so a couple things. One is there are funds out there that are fossil fuel free, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's some
Okay.
totally.
I was like, wait a second, on page 200, in the back of the book, I put a list of ETFs and mutual funds, just in no particular order other than assets from size. And I was actually, go ahead.
Man, qualify real quick. To be fair, like, we had Liz Simi from Honey Tree on a couple weeks ago. Like, yes, it is very easy if you want to invest in some of it. I'm saying if you have a 401k at your job that
Yeah,
just goes through a bank and you're not following it, that's, to be
sure.
clear,
Yeah. I
apologies.
just
But
I didn't want
yes.
listeners to be like, wait a second, there's not? Oh, I'm done. So
No, no,
there's a
that's,
few out there. You just have to dig. And in the back of the book, I marked them, some are 0%. I was actually surprised by a few that had 5% in or 2% in fossil fuels. So even being in the industry, because I spent some time going through the list. But to your original question, which was rating agencies, I mean, again, if I was a young whippersnapper, that might be a business that I would dip my toe in. And a lot of people already are doing this. Like, I go to these SRI conferences and I see the young whippersnappers with their booths set up. They're very smart. They're dipping their toe into the field that a lot of us are saying, wait, there's a gray area. The problem right now is the this computer smart, the nerds. No, I love nerds, but they're taking the data and aggregating it in such a cool way. And people like me are buying it because I need to see what the score is of Costco versus Walmart. But can you trust that data? Do I have the time? I got kids. I got a
Al
life
would
to live.
argue no, for the record.
Okay, perfect. And you
Our
guys know that.
entire business is based on how bad we found that data to be. So,
Well, what's interesting, you're saying something that I'm in a different, we're in the same business, but we're not. I'm down in the trenches, and I
yeah.
hate you guys are too. But I'm facing clients one on one. I'm getting them to switch their account they've held on to for 20 years. You guys are in the ESG data providers. You guys are almost like the ones who are providing people like me with the grenades that I need.
Yeah.
I trust those grenades, but I don't know if they're going to. And I don't like war, by the way. I'm not a weapon guy. I don't know why I'm bringing this up. I'm sorry about that, but
It's
I'm
good. They
just
work for
thinking,
analogies. I follow.
okay. So the point is, it's hard for me. I'm not going to decide. Clearly, cost is an issue for a small business like mine, but I'm going to look at some data providers. Oh, I like Ethos or whoever it is. I'm going to look at the data, I'm going to trust them, and I'm going to refer that information to my clients. But to your point, there's always a part of me that's like, man, unless I'm the one visiting the companies, like shaking the CEO's hand and going out drinking bourbon with them,
Which
I
you
don't really
did.
know. Huh? Go ahead. Go ahead.
You did some of that. I mean,
Shook
not
hands.
exactly that, but
Well,
addressed shareholder activism. That's going to be
I
my
was going
next
to say,
question,
I
but
thought you were,
yeah,
I didn't know you were going with that. Sure,
yeah.
absolutely. You can, if you own shares in stock, I love this topic, but we do not need to go down this. But you don't have to own much in a stock to say, hey, you're being, and remember, these are publicly traded companies, and you're allowed to be like little Miss Granny and say, hey, I have something to say to you. It's very exciting for me. And I think that goes back to my upbringing, which was, coming not from a lot, being able to enforce um,
Yeah, and I think, yeah,
in order to go ahead.
but
Yeah.
I was that's what I love about your book is it's almost you went into this big industry. Now you're fighting for the average Joe or the little man to go, you can have an impact, like right in the introduction. If you're putting money into a 401k Roth, you are having an impact. I love the story about, I forget her name, who had $1 million in an account, had what, 500,000 in Apple, wanted to sell 50K just to buy an EV. The trading or the investment firm is going to charge her what, $1,000 just to do that. She calls you up, you
Yeah.
move her to a different trading house. She executes that order for $4.95, right?
That's right.
And I mean, it was just like, yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people would have known to do that or would have called a butt, so being on the inside and helping people do that. And then you contrast that and I get to my point here, but ESG is not just about environmental impact, though that's a big piece of it, but just having impact on people, right? And your section on the original gangsters of impact investing was, that's where I really started to zero in. Like, this is where I'm passionate about, and it has to do with, what is it, the Community Development Financial Institution, the CDFI,
Well,
and
Nate,
that's what. Yeah,
can I
go
interrupt
ahead.
real fast?
Yeah.
Dale, and I think this is important for everyone listening. Can you explain what is the difference between impact investing and sustainable investing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sustainable investing versus impact, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So this one always irks me because, again, I sit on a few boards, or I have in the past, and people start saying we do impact investing, and I have to go, mute myself or walk away from the camera like Tessa does and get a swig of bourbon and come back because it just bothers me so much. And then I come back and I say, wait a second.
Hey, I
So
keep it sitting right here just in case.
oh, nice. Wow. It's early too, isn't it? It's too early for me, but
I guess it's noon on the East
It's
Coast, so you're good.
Friday.
man,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
long-winded. I didn't even answer your question yet. So it's really easy. Sustainable SRI, or sustainable and responsible investing, is the overarching theme title given to the industry that you and I are in, right? There's various components of sustainable and responsible investing, one of which is impact investing. Now, again, this is my opinion or my definition. There could be different definitions out there, but the point is, impact investing is saying, hey, Dale, I love that you're doing ESG, but I'd like to direct my capital to more impactful ways of doing it. The word impact is still being thrown around a lot, but that's how when I speak with people. So, well, what do you mean, Dale? Well, little old Joe up the street needs $500 to get his hoagie business going. You give him $500 directly, that's the most impact you can have if you want to invest in Joe. Now, is Joe going to pay you back? There's ways you can do that through crowdfunding sites, but that's impact investing. Now, I'm being very simple there. Impact can also mean, micro lending,
of course,
to families in Guatemala, but you're doing it through a portal or a website that you direct capital directly to them. So I hope that answered your question.
It did.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
perfect. And so, yeah, Nate, please continue. You're talking about community
no, yeah,
financial institutions. That's
yeah,
absolutely. And I said you wrote an example exactly like that with impact. I like you got a sentence. I like to think of them, which is the CDFI, which is the Community Development Financial Institutions. I like to think of them as the good guys of the banking industry. Instead of lending out funds to the rich techie buying their third home in Lake Tahoe for 3.2 million, CDFIs lend to distressed communities that need funding the most. And so my point in all of that was, a lot of this is impactful. You just have to look for it. And it's been around for a while. Like, Rob and I talk all the time, like, why does this ESG combination irk so many people when a lot of the components have been around for quite a bit of time. And like we just combine them and now everybody's,
In
a lot of people are
non-controversial
losing their
way.
minds. Yeah, in non-controversial ways. Like this isn't
Yeah.
really that new. So any thoughts
And be
about that?
careful.
Or
Yeah, be careful because, I'm in my mid 40s. But you talk to some of the old school, and I'm sure you guys have had them on the podcast. That they're from the 80s, and these they'll tell you the right away. We've been doing this for longer than you've been alive, buddy. And so keep that in mind, and always I'm always respectful of that. And again, I went to a great graduate school called Presidio Grad School, and I met a few young whippersnappers who were just getting in the industry, and I love talking with them, over 3 or 4 or 5 beers, because I would let them know. Hopefully, I instilled my, you know, who was I? Oh, I'm Luke Skywalker. So I don't know who the young ones are now, but I let them know, like, hey, I'm Luke. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to know that you should pay attention to the Yodas of the world because they're out there. And yeah, and CDFIs, I mean, it's just they've been around. That's like the original, right? Impact
yeah,
investing
yeah,
is
yeah,
and they're all
yeah,
in the Bay Area. They're everywhere. I mean, if you
yeah,
look, Chicago, it's just there's really awesome banking institutions who are giving money to people who really need it, with a good repayment rate. You're not just giving
yep, yep.
junk away and losing money. And it's funny, the one thing I'll bring up, you're bringing points of the book that I haven't read in a long time, Nate, but some of the times I was in a really bad mood, I think. I had a rough day. So maybe that was my best writing, was when I was really pissed off at something. It may not have to do with anything.
Yeah,
But if you ever want to write a
yeah,
book, do it in moments when you're either really happy or really pissed off. Because when you're just blah, kind of like,
yeah,
today after I
yeah,
did yoga, I'm just like kind of like in a blah mood. And I'm
yeah,
glad to be here though, guys. Don't get me wrong. But when you write, it's good to do it in moments when you're on these extremes, I think, because your
Yeah, I
hatred.
got my master's in writing and publishing from Emerson College, and I saw the whole book production process. So I know exactly what you mean. And that's exactly what teachers and, those people that I've networked with are like that. And that's what teachers grew up telling me is a lot of writing happens in either the darkest moments or the happiest moments. So
Yeah.
I agree with you there. And it's happened to myself too. So
Yeah.
Well, I promise not to buy a third lake house or a third house in Lake Tahoe.
You can buy a third house, but if it's like 80 grand, if you buy one like it for like 80 grand in
That's
Syracuse,
right.
that's
That's
fine.
right.
Yeah.
3.2 billion. Yeah. No, I just thought that was, I just wanted to make sure that we understand that a lot of these pieces have been around for a while. We talk about that in other podcasts, that this is not some out of nowhere thought process. Like a lot of my friends, like, oh, ESG, isn't that like the new communist regime coming down from on high? I'm like, no, guys, you guys have to look deeper into this and the different aspects of it. So,
Yeah. I get or go ahead, Tesla.
oh no, I mean, maybe it's because I'm new to this field and also not harping on anyone's buttons, but I am a little bit younger. So a lot of people, when I tell them, and they're like, oh, what do you do for work? And I tell them, I'm a marketing content creator for this company called like that focuses on ESG. And a lot of people are like, huh, what is that? And I've even had like, I'm not for older people, for a lack of terms, people that are older than me. I've also had some of those people be like, what is that? And so I've had to explain it. So it kind of also piggybacks off of what you're saying, Nate, is that it's being talked about, like it's always been there. But I think now, today at least, it's being, because I think the times have changed where, we're protecting the climate more, protecting the world more, focusing on X, Y, and Z, organic food, supporting our local markets and, kind of stuff like that, where realistically, if you think about it, 5 years, 10 years ago, it was still around, but it wasn't as evident. So I think that, we're bringing it to light more, I guess you could say, but in new ways. And I think that goes back to what I was saying in the whole conversations thing, where it's being spoken about more and such. So
Yeah. And in this industry, as you guys know, real fast, Rob, it's intangible. Like investing, this is the problem.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Were you going to say, like, if I had an organic bread business, I think I'd be, and I'm a happy man, but I think I'd be happier. And you're like, what do you mean? Well, I would have something to show, like this nice loaf of olive organic. Whereas in the investment field, all of us, if you're in this industry, in the information industry, I have nothing to show my clients. I have to inspire them to know that, hey, you're going to buy a fund. It's not going to hold assault weapon manufacturers. I hope you feel good about that. Here's your statement. And so I wish I had something like a loaf of bread to give them, but I'm not in the bread business. So.
I get that, but following up on what Tessa said, and something I think the book does quite well is like when we talk about educating people, I think people recoil, but what you're educating people on is how simple this can actually be. Like, don't overcomplicate.
No, and humor always helps. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
So I actually had one last line of questioning. I do want to ask a little about the activism stuff. Because when we say it can be simple and we also talk about impact, there are ways to say increase the degree of impact you're making directly. But before I get into the question, I'm going to ask if you can tell the story that's in your book in your own words. Do you know the one I'm referring to, or do you need me to lead it in?
No, is it referring to Oracle?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, this was a moment in writing the book where I was like, I had a book coach, and by the way, hugely important and not as expensive as one thinks. To have somebody who guides you along, and I'm back to your question in a second, but some of the things I put in the book where I was like, yeah, again, in my weird moods, maybe I had a couple Miller Lights in me or a couple, I don't drink Miller Lite, but a couple beers in me, and I was like, oh, I'm going to let this one flow, and some of the titles like, Hasta la vista, baby. Anyhow, I look at the titles now of these chapters, like, oh, these are pretty funny. Actually, I must have been hammered. So shareholder activism is a way to advocate for change in a company that you own. Of course, the company is public, right? And I don't need to go into it explaining it if anybody ever wants to get in touch with me. And now
we've done episodes on it to a degree.
Oh, you have? Okay. What's really cool about that topic is now I have clients who are asking me. I have a great client. She's just filed with Tesla on a certain proposal with something she's very passionate about, and she owns stock, and she's like, Dale, let's do this. And so it's taken years, but she finally, so that's kind of cool when you can see your sort of influence on clients because they saw me do it personally. So, but yeah, years ago, Oracle, huge company, Bay Area, and good old Larry Ellison was the CEO back then. I think he's still the president of the board maybe, but I think he sort of stepped away. But back then he was, go ahead.
At the time, the richest person in the world, I think, too, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just loaded, like buying islands off of Hawaii. He still owns that huge island off of Maui. You just stare at it and you're like, oh, whose is that? He probably just sits there and laughs. It's like all these tourists are laughing, but I own that island. It's really sad. Nobody should be able to buy an island. But the point is, that proposal happened to be, and this is 10 years ago at least, it was on executive compensation, right? Which if you know the topic of shareholder activism, certain topics sort of become popular for a few years and then fade off. Really has to do with how people are feeling. So executive compensation, back then, I think there was a lot of talk about what is the average employee making relative to the CEO. And clearly Larry was way beyond. In his industry, it was ridiculous. So the point is, got to get up on stage and speak about, if you file a proposal, you get, back in the old days, you would actually go to the headquarters and you'd get 5 minutes to do a speech. And like, here, it's pretty awesome. Like 200, 300 people in front of you and all the executives and all these multi-billionaires and little me, like with my $5 Kmart tie on, I try to class it up a little bit, but, at that point, I brought my then girlfriend, you can bring a guest with you. And I was like, oh, I'm a hot shot now. I have this proposal. Like, you got to check this out. I was like, just sit here. I got to go up on the stage. Like my ultra cool moment. But I remember him just staring at her, not paying any attention to me while I'm literally almost in tears, giving my emotional speech. And to this day, I always say, like, I don't know if I should be bad or like super stoked that like the richest person in the world, richest man in the world person was flirting with my then girlfriend. So I can, makes me feel.
You should have been like, hey, Larry, over here, buddy. Eyes on me.
So, I mean, it was a serious topic.
That would have gone viral.
What's that?
That would have gone viral had it been.
Oh yeah.
15 years later.
Yeah.
And I don't know the proposals nowadays. I think they do them all via the Zoom. I think I don't even know if you still go to.
You can.
You
A
can.
lot
Okay.
haven't switched back from Zoom, but then some companies and some states, I think, have even passed laws that you have to be in person for various reasons.
Okay.
But you make a point. It is a serious topic, and you actually touched on, because I got two more questions for you. And the first one, I would be very curious on your thoughts. So you mentioned earlier some of these funds that are trending towards sustainable, but are maybe 5% in fossil fuels or something along those lines. What, or I guess, how do you see? So you have a client who's interested in trying to drive change at Tesla. How much value do you see in getting into some of the industries that might not comport with what would be considered, sustainable investing, and trying to drive change at the company as opposed to divesting from?
Yeah, no, you could have a whole podcast on this topic. It's
Yeah.
hot and heavy. I'm still in the camp that says, and you guys might be that you are crazy, dude. I can't stand when funds or pensions or foundations come say to me, "We want to own it. We want to own Exxon, or we want to own Chevron. We have a $5 million position in it. We're keeping it because we want to advocate for change, right?" And you may say, "Well, what do you mean, Dale? You don't need a lot of money to advocate for change, even if you have 5 million in the stock." Which, by the way, it's
That's
peanuts for
that's nothing.
that's yeah for
Nothing.
my firm, which we don't. That's a big chunk of change. But when you have 100 million, but the point is, here's what you're like. What do you mean? That pension, if they really truly were listening to their, or say it was a student run, you know, foundation or whatever it is, they could trim that position down to $100,000 or make it 200,000, right? Because remember, in order to file a proposal, all you need is 30 or 40 grand. I don't have the exact number. It used to just be 2,000. It's now stepped up to 35,000.
I think it varies a little by state too. And then there's always time restraints depending on how much you have.
That's right. But my point is, if I was on the board, the president of XYZ Foundation, I would say, let's trim it down to 200,000, right? That allows us a seat at the table to file our shareholder proposal, but it also lets our stakeholders know that we've divested as much as we can, but we still want to have a voice at the table for the shareholder proposal voting, right? And I don't think many people talk about this. The camp is either keep it all, that way we have a voice, or just divest of it all, and that way we can pronounce ourselves as fully divested. But I still feel like there's a threshold that nobody's mentioning, and if certain institutions really believed in this, they could do what I say, which is keep 100 grand or 200, seat at the table, but then promote yourself as saying you've divested as much as possible.
And it's such a valid point. And because the amount doesn't matter. I remember I was at a prior place of employment on a call with Walmart's counsel after the Foreign Corrupt Policies Act violation.
Okay.
And they were defending their inability to catch it. And I actually was sympathetic to their cause, because one of the people on our side on the call was like, it's $25 million. How did you notice it? And this woman did not pause. She was like, 25 million is immaterial at Walmart.
Crazy.
Like,
and
it's
also, it's sickening. But always remember, Exxon and Chevron and McDonald's, whoever it is, I'm not, and I think you guys hinted, like, you're kind of nice in this book, Dale, in certain ways. They could be sustainability champions in 10
Yeah.
years. I could, if I owned a $1 billion pension, I'd be like, you know what, we're going to drop you guys now. Hey, Frank, let's go have a scotch, the CEO of wherever. If you guys tell me that your 80% of your revenues now come from alternatives, and there are interesting articles written about Exxon and Chevron and which ones are doing a better job of getting into alternative energy, once you say that you guys are killing it, we're going to come back in. But right now, on behalf of my clients and our beliefs, we don't feel like that's where we want to be. So remember, just because a company's the fingers being pointed at them now doesn't mean that in 5 or 10 years that Walmart is not the next, Chipotle or whatever it is. So,
Yeah. Well, you half stole my last question for you, but it's a good segue. You're in SustainVest. This is what you do day in, day out. Like you said, in the trenches, you see it. What do you see in the next 5 or 10 years? And particularly give us some reason for hope.
I'm not a very hopeful person, but in general, it's an East Coast thing. If you're from the East Coast,
Well, and you're Jersey too, especially. My mom's from Jersey, so I get it.
Yeah. just miserable people, man.
But happy being so, to be fair.
I'm from
Yeah.
upstate New York, and I don't know. I will fully say that since moving to California, us New Yorkers, we're just mean.
Mean people.
We're just
Can't get
grumpy. And like,
don't.
yeah, the month that I went home for the holidays, I was like, wow, I'm
I
mad.
think
Like
it's the
I'm
cold weather. That cold gets to most
yes,
of us.
huge. Yeah, seasonal
Ooh,
depression's a thing, but
yeah.
yeah.
Well, back to the question. I'm hopeful. What a great time to be in this industry because 20 years ago, I don't even think there would even be a podcast on this topic, right? So that's eye-opening. I think the one, the data providers, you already mentioned this, Rob, that needs to be cleaned up a little bit, and it will. It's just going to take time, right? It's just going to take
That's
time.
everyone check out alesg.com because we've cleaned it up.
Oh, there you go. See, I didn't. There's nice. Um, I would like to look at that.
You gave me an awesome opportunity for a plug. I got to take it. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Keep going, please. Please keep going.
See, I didn't even know that. So definitely as younger investors, remember this is all, I launched a robo advisor called Sustainfolio because there were so many young investors and they don't have tons of money to hire an advisor. I'm also finding out they don't even want to see me or shake my hand. And so the robo advisors are also becoming hip as long as they're integrating ESG as best they can, which is what I'm attempting to do in the robo. Because at that point, you're no longer owning stocks and picking stocks, you're buying ETFs and you're relying on the ESG data. So the point is two things: data is coming, just like AI. We're all going to have robotic friends in our houses. Um, that's a different topic.
Yeah.
That's a creepy topic. There's probably movies written about it.
Yeah.
And so the data's coming, the robots are coming. That's a chapter title. The robots are coming, and then also you have the young people like Tessa who are just and Nate. I mean, I don't know how old you guys are. I
No,
don't know.
I'm 40.
And
I'm with
Rob,
you, Dale. I'm
and Rob.
45. I'm with you.
Okay.
So I'm in your camp.
The point is,
Yeah.
you have these things coming. The age of sustainability. We
Yeah.
already see it. Look at Target. Look at all these big institutions. These big companies are publicly disclosing that they're doing all this great stuff. Again, 20 years ago, this wasn't happening. It's coming because of consumer demand. So investor demand from young investors. They're going to walk away from Goldman Sachs and B of A. Believe me. And the cronies over at B of A, they're sitting at the boardroom and they're sweating about this. They don't know how to. They're attempting to be in that business, but not kick out their old school folk. So they're in a balancing act. It's fun to be Sustainvest because I don't have to balance anything. I'm 100% on board with ESG. So they're balancing it, but 20 years from now, there's not going to be any more balancing. So there's things happening, and I hope in my 60s when I'm retired as that bartender down in the Caribbean. Wow, that was
I'll be
nice.
there. I'll be sitting at the bar drinking.
I'll be there. Oh,
Okay.
yeah, I'll be there with you.
We're
Yeah.
going to talk about, man, do you remember the old days when ESG was nothing?
Yeah.
So,
And
Well, Dale,
Tessa will be making fun of young people.
that's right. And Dale, what I love what you're talking about to piggyback on that is you have young people, Tessa generation, my daughter who's 17, they have more knowledge at their fingertips than any generation history. But you need the wisdom of the Yodas to apply a lot of that knowledge. So you might have a lot of people like, I want to go do this. But Dale, you've done it, right? So you can I think there's always going to be those sages that go, that's a lot of great information. It's a lot of great data. Here's how you apply it, and here's how you come up with an execution plan to get to your goal. And I think that's part of the missing piece of what you're probably providing is great. You're passionate about this. You want to go after this company for this reason. Let me show you how to do it. And I think that's a big piece of what's missing because just taking data in is like, what am I supposed to do with that?
Sure.
So,
Yeah. How do you educate those?
Yeah.
I think us four, let's talk offline after this. We may have a bar idea. I'm sensing like ESG bar in the Caribbean, and we literally pour drinks and talk SRI all day long.
St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, baby.
I've never been, but it looks nice in the movies. Those Tom Cruise movies. It looks like a nice place to be.
So look, I agree. It's the reason I have hope. I love to tease Tessa about being young, but she's not that young. It's just because I feel old. But we need more smart young people curious like Tessa, and I'm seeing more and more of them. Dale, go ahead, Tessa.
Oh, no. I was just gonna kind of say how I just had this thought where kind of piggybacking off of what Nate had said with the whole like Yodas and like the young, like where I'm like the young Jedi's. It's kind of almost where it's, and I think this is just evident throughout time where it's, you know, the Yodas, it's their time to, I guess, not like legacy, but like let the younger generation be the advocates that you want us to kind of be. If that makes sense.
Since the beginning of humanity, when oral tradition became a thing, 100% with you. Dale, don't feed the clown, sustainable investing for everyday life. I will put the links up on the screen, but before we let you go, you want to plug where to jump on and check you out?
Yeah, just Amazon. Like I said, the robots are taking over the world, so I that's where you have to buy things now is Amazon. So, and my website for the book is just my name, dalewannen.com. So check it out. There's stuff on there. Keep the 5-star reviews coming. I
I
really
just gave
appreciate
you
it.
another one.
Nice.
I want to,
Great.
hey, Rob, I want to have Dale back because there's a whole section of cryptocurrencies.
There are several things that we couldn't touch on, but the book
I'm like,
is
yeah.
it's remarkably comprehensive.
Yeah.
In a
So everyone
silly
listening,
Jersey, in a silly Jersey accent. Keep that in mind. The whole time, picture like this person saying "wooder" and like "use guys" and "wooder."
hey,
Got it. Got it.
on that note, thank you so much for being here. A really good. This was one of our more fun podcasts too, but got into some serious stuff. I really appreciate this. I appreciate your time and looking forward to have you back.
Thank you guys. Have a good one. Happy holidays.
Yep. You too.